Wild Karen goes on rampage over coffee. I woke up in the hospital. Story 1. Crazy woman assaults me for not knowing where the coffee is. Some of these stories have reminded me of an encounter that I had about 7 years ago. I was keeping a very detailed diary at this point, so I have all the details logged as well as all the info that I got afterwards. A little bit of background is in order here. I grew up in a horrible household until I had finally saved up enough money and mustered up enough courage to leave. I had moved to a different town about 2 hours by train, found myself a small apartment and a quiet job as an office assistant. I also have started therapy as soon as I settled in. With all that out of the way, let's get to the actual encounter. It was about 10 months after my move. One Saturday, after a really long crying episode, I went to the fridge to find out it was empty, and I needed to go get some groceries unless I wanted to eat crackers and pickle water. I totally wasn't in any shape to go anywhere where there might be other people, but it was my fault for postponing the trip for so long. So I just pushed myself to get dressed, brush my teeth and my hair, grab a shopping basket and go to the nearest supermarket, which is actually the same chain I used to work at prior to this. So I walk into the shop, already shaking and anxious, and try not to attract any attention to myself whatsoever. I grab a bit of produce, a carton of milk, several packets of ham and cheese, some yogurt. I'm almost done. Just a bag of sugar, some pasta and ketchup, and I can ball to the register. When someone taps me on the shoulder and I'm immediately triggered, meaning most of my system shut down in order not to do something stupid. I slowly turn around to see an angry-looking woman that could be my mother, which is acting as another trigger, nervously tapping her foot on the floor. Can I help you? I managed to get out through the fog because my polite system stays operational at all times. About time you noticed me. I've been talking to you for about 3 minutes by now. Where is that coffee? That's supposed to be on sale. It takes me a while to process what she's saying and formulate an answer. I don't know. I don't drink coffee. I didn't ask if you drink it, you dimwit. I asked you where I can buy it. At this point, the lady's practically screaming at me, at which point I start to back away from her, and then everything goes blank. The next thing I knew, I was staring at a hospital ceiling with a throbbing pain at the back of my head, and a nurse leaning over me, asking me how I'm feeling, to which I'm asking her what day and time it is and what happened. She frowns and says, "It's Sunday, 8 p.m. and apparently you hit that shelf pretty hard." I just let myself fall asleep again because I seriously wasn't in any shape to think straight at that point. On Monday, my therapist came, helped me call my workplace since I definitely wasn't coming to work for a couple of days. Then 2 police officers came in to take my testimony and ask if I wanted to press charges, which is taking me back. Like me suing someone. For what? Apparently, after I started backing away from the woman, I shut down for good and started frantically pleading with her to please not hurt me while she continued to scream and closed in on me until I could not step back any further, at which point she got so upset she grabbed my shirt and yanked me to her to be close to my face, to which I have instinctively reacted by pushing her away with as much force as I could. Since she didn't expect retaliation, she lost her balance, let go of my shirt, and we both went backwards. She landed on the tile floor while I hit the shelf behind me head first. The security guard and one of the employees got there at about the same time, so they saw us fight and fall. The security guy went to help the Karen, still screaming at the top of her lungs that she wants me fired for being rude, while I was curled up on the floor, hands around my head, crying and promising, "I'll be good, just please stop." Anyway, police and paramedics came. Officers scooped up Karen after seeing the camera footage, while paramedics scooped up me and got me to the hospital with a fine brain concussion. It has turned out that Karen was originally from the same town as me and saw me working at that supermarket regularly. So when she happened to be in a different town, it didn't occur to her that I'm not working in that particular store. And since she was somehow acquainted with my mother, who most likely told her how much she didn't like me, she treated me accordingly. Or at least that's my conclusion. To this day, I'm not aware of any other interaction between us other than this. I ended up pressing charges after consulting my therapist. I think Karen got charged with assault, destroying property, and something I don't really remember, and apparently didn't bother writing down, and ended up in jail for 2 years since I've got a head injury. And my lawyer didn't miss the opportunity to throw in my mental health state as well. I didn't set foot in that supermarket for at least a year afterward, just bought a new shopping basket and went elsewhere. When I eventually did go back, I ran into that employee that was there during the incident, and they told me a couple details the police and doctors omitted, like the point where I was crying and begging on the floor. I've had a couple more encounters with Karens after that in various places, but by that time, I was fortunately way better off mentally and never broke down like that again in public, which is also why I'm able to write about this now, at least anonymously like this. Story 2. My mother-in-law tried to stop my wife's life-saving treatments. Allow me to introduce you to my late mother-in-law. I'll call her Carol for the sake of variety. Though I've heard many stories about her, for the most part, I'll stick with things that I witnessed myself. There are enough of them. I don't think Carol ever met a New Age concept that she didn't like. Her express goal was to synthesize all religion, science, and mysticism into a unified whole. all of it. To this end, she amassed a large collection of books and stranger objects from her travels, with a special focus on healing. Her library had volumes about vibration manipulation, curative trampolining, homeopathic color therapy, and on and on. I'm not joking or exaggerating here. Her shelves had lots of, admittedly pretty, mineral crystals, along with bottles of magic goddess essence water evaporated away, and bogus radon protectors, powered by diagrams of geometric figures. Her favorite book, based on the number of annotations and sticky notes, was hundreds of pages of word salad about spiritual beings from the star Arcturus. That's Arcturus spelled with an H because of H-bar, Planck's constant from physics. Her pentagonal home was custom built around an energy vortex that she discovered in the coastal peaks of British Columbia. My wife got the heck out at age 17 and moved across the country to go to university. For most of the time after that, she went relatively low contact. A decade ago, my wife suffered from a surgical error which resulted in abdominal sepsis and asked me to call her mother. That made me understand just how deathly serious the situation was. I was to call in the family for what might be the last time. I hadn't grasped that her life was truly at risk until that point. Nothing less would have induced her to try to get her mother to visit. To her credit, Carol did hurry out for what was supposed to be a couple of weeks. It was expected that in that time, my wife would either pass on or be on the road to recovery. Carol stayed in our home, and at first, things didn't go too badly. For the most part, we just didn't talk about the treatments that my wife was undergoing. Carol did express concern about the antibiotics that were being given, since according to her own views, antibiotics did nothing but harm. But a couple of weeks stretched into a couple of months, and Carol became harder to live with. She was angry when I stroked my wife's hair with my hand because I was blocking the energy from her chakra. She started blaming me for having somehow caused the nausea that the botched surgery was supposed to cure. I drove her out to pick up a magical concoction of essential oils on the condition that she'd check with one of the doctors before applying them. I pointed out that if the mixture had the power to heal, then it also had the power to cause harm, which Carol denied. When we got back to the hospital, I nabbed one of the residents when we reached my wife's floor to ask about that. Carol became furious about that, and it was clear that she had no intention of talking with the doctors. At home, she got worse with me. She was claiming that I was mistreating my wife by not letting her have her things in the house. At that point, I lost my temper. The first time I had yelled at a person in literally a couple of decades. I told her that almost everything in sight was actually her daughter's displacing my stuff. The sofas, the piano table and chairs, the bookshelves and the electronics. The shelves for the CDs and DVDs were mine, but half the contents were hers. Carol wanted to know if I'd be continuing the herbal remedies after she left, and I told her that that was up to my wife. I'd continue them if she wanted, I'd stop them if she preferred. Carol screamed that I was mistreating my wife by following her own wishes rather than her mother's. On the night before Carol was finally supposed to be heading out, I was restless. That particular nightmare was about to end, but my wife was still quite ill. I got to thinking about that essential oil mixture, which included both oil of cloves and oil of cinnamon. Those are both strongly irritating if left on the skin, and Carol had been painting my wife's feet with the stuff. Her feet were, apparently, the correct energy points to draw out the infection. I went online and found the manufacturer's instruction, which specified that the oil needed to be significantly diluted with some neutral oil if it was going to be applied to the skin. Carol hadn't even been using the stuff properly. Well, that explained why the skin on my wife's feet was yellow and starting to peel. But Carol was furious when I calmly pointed out the problems that she was creating out of ignorance. A few days after Carol left, my wife took a turn for the worse and had to go back into the intensive care unit. And I dreaded the phone call that I had to make, not because of the bad news, but because I anticipated how Carol would react, and she didn't disappoint. If you really loved her, you'd put her back on the herbal oil and stop the antibiotics. You know perfectly well they won't do anything. At which point I hung up. I had other things to worry about. My wife pulled through after months in the hospital and 3 stays in the ICU. She's still in poor health. I told her that I was putting my foot down. Under no circumstances was her mother welcome under my roof again. I didn't care about the family custom that family members were always welcome to stay as guests. I would not stay under the same roof as her mother. Having heard my stories, and based on her own experiences, my wife agreed. A few years ago, Carol passed, much as she had lived. She was diagnosed with metastasized lung cancer. Although she did undergo some real medical therapies, she relied mostly on her quack remedy. Pawpaw twig powder, whey protein immune boosters, and the like, the usual crap that ethics-free swindlers pawn off on desperate sufferers. She firmly believed that all the little white spots on her lung x-rays were a good sign, and that her rapid weight loss indicated that her boosters were draining the cancer away. If there's some existence after death, I hope she came to appreciate all of the harm that she did in life. Except a couple of nights after she passed, I was driving from the hospital back to the Energy Vortex house. The rental car's navigation device suggested a shorter route that I'd taken to get there, but that route turned into a back road, into a rough road in the hills, into a track through the forest, and, in pitch darkness apart from my headlights, over a rocky bump and directly into a tree trunk. Luckily, I was traveling slowly and I stopped in time. As I paused, shaken, I got to wondering if there might be something to Carol's worldview after all, and if her vengeful spirit might have possessed the GPS device, making one last try at getting revenge on me. Story 3. No vacation or paid time off until October. Okay, I'm taking all of October off. Something happened at my husband's work last night that reminded me of this decade-old story. For context, at the time, my husband worked overnights at one of the largest supermarket operators in North America. I was about 6 months pregnant, and the store he worked in had a change in who the store manager was, and when I went shopping I used either a wheelchair or a scooter with a card on it due to a disability that makes it difficult for me to walk under normal circumstances. Background. Originally, we had felt pretty lucky that between all the pregnancy tests I had done to confirm that yes, I am in fact pregnant, and the ultrasound, the earliest and latest due date we had been given, all fell in the first week of September. So my husband had planned to use one of his weeks of vacation that week and then use his paternity leave after that week so he would be able to be there while I was at the hospital in recovery and for the first days of our baby's life. His boss seemed genuinely confused by the request. He was 22, single, and called his truck his baby. But he had said something along the lines of, "Hey man, it's your vacation. You should use it how you want to." Then about a week later, I came home from one of my doctor's appointments to a message on the answering machine saying, "Unfortunately, I have to deny your request for vacation and paternity leave in September, as someone with more seniority has put in for those days off as well. I hope this doesn't cause problems between you and your wife." I burst into tears on the spot, but my husband said he'd go talk to the person who requested those days off, explained that he asked for that time off because it's when the baby is due, and see if he could offer them something to give him those days off instead. Unfortunately, it was one of his co-workers who was going to have major surgery and needed that time off to recover, so we couldn't ask him to trade vacation weeks with us. My husband put in for time off for the second week in September and it's denied. Then he tries the third week and is denied again. But this time his boss tells him that he won't be able to use any of his vacation until October due to his position and who has time off. Cue the malicious compliance. We realized that because this boss was new, he probably didn't realize that my husband had been saving all of his vacation days, PTO and paternity leave. When we added up all the time, it amounted to 3 weeks of time off. And if we worked it around to start around when his days off were, he would be able to be home with the baby from October 1st until November 9th. His co-workers on the night crew and several of his friends on the morning crew felt that he had been seriously done over by the new boss, so they got in on this plan with us. We waited until the boss day off, and that's when my husband put in the schedule for the time off he was requesting, which was approved by the scheduling manager and the night crew manager. This was in July, so the only thing left to do was wait. Our baby was born in the early hours of the morning, about 2 days before our earliest due date. After 29 hours of stage 2 and stage 3 labor, I ended up having an induction due to the fact that I had been in early stage labor since the beginning of August and it just wasn't progressing. When my husband called the night shift manager to say that I was going to the hospital to give birth, he told my husband to call in if he was going to miss any more days off work and that they would make sure it got covered. It wasn't PTO, but it was considered an excused absence. After I came home from the hospital, my mom started staying overnight with us temporarily to help out preparing meals, taking care of the dog and the household chores, so I could focus on taking care of myself and the baby. That first month home was pretty rough, so I was relieved when October rolled around and I finally had his help 24/7 and my mom was able to take a break. The aftermath first up was the 3 days of paternity leave. On the morning of the 5th day of this 40-day-long vacation, the boss woke me up at 6 a.m. wanting to talk to my husband. I told him he was feeding the baby and asked why he was calling. He said he was checking in to see why my husband no-call, no-show the night before, and I said sarcastically, "Oh no, that's terrible, I'll go get him for you." I put the phone on speaker so my husband can talk to his boss while he's feeding the baby so I get to hear everything. The boss very smugly informed my husband that his paternity leave was over and since he didn't come in the night before, he would be written up for a no-call, no-show. My husband said, "Yes, I know my paternity leave is over, but my first vacation week started last night." Boss, first vacation week. Husband, yeah, I have 3. I was going to use one in September, one in October, and one in November, but since you told me I couldn't use any paid time off until October, I decided to just take all of October off to be with my wife and newborn. Boss, I'll call you back after I look into this. I don't know how I managed to stay silent and not laugh at this conversation, but somehow I did. We got a call back later that day that went something like this. Boss, yeah, I'm going to need you to come into work tonight. I never would have approved your request for time off if I knew you were taking the whole month off. Husband, you didn't approve it. The night manager and scheduling manager both approved this, so I'm not coming in tonight. Boss, clearly thinking this is a gotcha moment. I didn't approve it, and I need you to come in tonight. So you'll be here at 10 on your regular schedule for the rest of the month, or you'll be written up. Husband, no, I won't. I submitted the request in July, and you never denied my request. It's been approved by the other managers, and it's already started, so it's too late for you to deny it now. Boss, I'll call you back. After that, my husband called the union steward to confirm that he was in the clear, and they say that he is. We got another call the following Sunday, which was my husband's next day off, asking if he would be coming in that night since he wasn't listed as being on vacation in the system. Husband, am I on the schedule? Boss, no. Husband, then it's my night off, so no. He hung up after that, but we got a call like that every night my husband wasn't on the schedule due to it being one of his regular days off and him not being marked as being on vacation in the system. Some of the ladies in the bakery and deli section of the store put together a card shower for us and gave them gift cards since we never said anything to them about when my baby shower was or where we were registered. Oops. Later that week, I made a trip into the store one afternoon to pick up some stuff and introduce them to the baby, and my mom came along too. While we were over there, the store manager came up and said, "You must be husband's wife." I was feeling petty, so I pointed out that we would have met sooner if he didn't have a habit of running away and hiding in his office when customers approached him. I don't know if that irritated him or if he was planning on saying this next anyway. But the next words out of his mouth were, "You don't look like you need help with the baby." Husband said he was taking time off to help you with the baby because you have a disability, but I guess you don't need it. Huh. The bakery deli ladies glared at him and my mom went pale because she knows I usually react very strongly to those kinds of comments. But my mom also raised me to be civil and mannerly, so I just smiled and said, "I hope you don't speak to your employees like that. That can get you fired." Bless your heart. And one of his employees told him I was right, so he sulked off. He seemed so desperate to find any reason he could to force my husband to come back to work before the end of the month. I started wondering if he was being petty and might try to retaliate after my husband came back to work, or if he was just desperate. So I called one of my husband's co-workers. Remember when I said new boss was 22? Well, he also had a habit of bragging about how he started working for the company as a cashier when he was 17 and worked his way up to management in just 5 years. At some point after the baby was born, district came and did a walkthrough, and it turned out his dad was the district manager and he didn't work his way up to management. He was a nepotism baby that burned bridges with more than a few employees. Then he turned up in a brand new truck and said with the year-end bonus he was going to get, he could pay it off. And in one go, several employees walked, including 2 on the night crew. Since my husband was on paternity leave, he had to work overnights to make up the slack. He had never showed up to cover overnights when they were shorthanded before that. So we figured he was desperate to get my husband to come back, because working overnights was cutting into his dating time. Finally, the end of my husband's vacation time came and his boss called again. "Boss, you used up your paternity leave and your vacation weeks. You're coming in tonight, right?" Husband, "No, I still have PTO days left this year, and since I won't be able to use them all between November and the end of December and they don't roll over into next year, I decided to take them now." Boss, "Well, when are you coming back to work?" Husband, "November 10th. Boss called back the next day to tell my husband that actually he had used up his paternity leave while we were at the hospital giving birth, so he would have to use PTO to cover that, and actually he had used a week of PTO when he took me to the hospital with fake labor, so actually he would be coming back to work on November 1st. My husband called the union steward and filed a complaint that his boss was retroactively deciding what counted as paternity leave and what counted as PTO and trying to force him to use PTO days to cover days where he either went in late or left for a couple hours and then came back and stayed late to make up the missed hours. He went in to fill out some paperwork and we didn't hear from his boss again between then and when he got replaced at the end of the following January. Am I the jerk for making a bratty teen weigh herself at the top of a water slide? I work as a lifeguard at a water park and part of my job includes managing the top of the water slides. I'm to make sure that no one does anything dangerous like going face first, cramming too many people in one inner tube, etc. I'm also instructed to ask anyone who looks like they could be over the weight limit, 250 pounds, to weigh themselves on our scale and deny them entry if they refuse. I'm not super comfortable with this, but it's much better than risking people's safety. Here lies the problem. I lift weights, and for this reason, I am very dense. I weigh 185 pounds, but somehow wear a size 6. Most of my friends also lift and have similar body compositions to me. For this reason, I have trouble estimating how much someone actually weighs. This problem presented itself last weekend when an overweight teenager wanted to ride the slide. She most likely wasn't over 250 pounds, but I couldn't be certain. I've gotten way better at estimating weights, but my supervisor says if there's any chance that they're over 250 to weigh them. So I approached her gently and asked her to please get on the scale. She met me with a snarky teenager attitude and said, "What if I refuse?" She was with a group of teenagers, some of whom were giggling. "Then you won't be allowed on the slide," I said matter-of-factly. She rolled her eyes and got on the scale, and her weight wasn't even close to 250, so I felt kind of bad. She then said, "See," and went along with her friends. Although she gave me attitude, I could tell she was embarrassed. Her face was red as she went back to her friends, who were all thin. I asked my supervisor how he would have handled the situation, and he said I did the right thing, that it's better to hurt someone's feelings than to break someone's bone. However, yesterday I was called into the office of the owner of the water park. She told me she received an angry email from a parent about how I embarrassed their kid in front of her friend. I explained to her that I was just following protocol, and she asked me how much she actually weighed. I gave her the answer, and she laughed at me and told me I could never get a job as a weight guesser at a carnival, and that I need to do my job better. My supervisor is backing me up and saying I was doing what he has required me to do. I'm thankful for his support, but honestly, this whole situation is making me feel like a jerk. I know teens are a particularly vulnerable population, as I was one not too long ago, and I could have possibly handled the situation with more care. But at the same time, safety is my first priority. Does that make me the jerk? No jerks here. But next time, pull 3 people from the group and weigh them all. Sorry, I have to weigh 10% of the people going by to check we aren't exceeding weight limits. That way you don't target or embarrass one person. Well, what do you think?